These 10 novels prove that Western civilization is collapsing, and until you read them, you will not understand the organic core of the collapse, because it's easy to be a logic bro and point out to little things that are happening in the economy or with social issues. But lived experiences and stories are the real place to search for answers, because stats will never give you the entire picture and can be easily manipulated. Reading the news won't give you the full picture because, once again, it can be easily manipulated, but the stories are surface level. Novels, especially good ones, give you an interiority of the experience of living in a civilization that's collapsing faster than ever, that no other artistic medium can give you. And let's be honest, if you actually believe that a collapse is happening and you want to make a change, how has that gone for you when you've tried to talk to other people about it? Do they care? Do they care when you bring up all of the stats, all the crazy social issues, the stories? Maybe they may nod their head in agreement, but are they transformed? Are they activated? And personally, one of the most effective ways that I've seen people activate is through the power of story. This is why sports teams have a mascot and a color scheme, and there is a storyline behind every single game. The same goes with boxing, with branding. Everything centers around story, and it has been manipulated, to activate us to become bigger consumers or bigger sleepers. But stories can also be used to awaken people. And so novelists are not just storytellers, but that is their reality. They study for tens of thousands of hours, and most of the time are the perfect sensitive archetype to capture these main ideas that we all know are going on and then put them in a digestible form that almost anyone can understand. And so if you do not know, my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we talk about only transformative literature, only books that can not just wake you up, but then give you the energy to change your life. And so if you are interested on going on a journey to create a literary renaissance, and all of us are needed, then please consider subscribing to this channel, because I'm trying to release daily videos and dedicate myself to this cause, and I would love your support. And so enough with the intro. Let's hop into it, everyone. Are you excited for book number 1? Because I feel like I got a pain in my back and I'm reaching, and I just found a book named No Country for Old Men by Mr. Cormac McCarthy. And many of you guys saw the Coen brothers adaptation of this book and absolutely ate it up. Call it Anton Chigurh being a badass, Llewellyn Moss on the run, Sheriff Bell and his longing, Woody Harrelson just randomly being there. It was an awesome movie, but the movie does a great job of bringing over the thriller elements of the novel. But in my opinion, it does a terrible job of bringing over the actual purpose and major theme of this book, which is civilizational decline. Because one of the most triggering issues on the news right now and in politics is immigration and the border crises that are happening all across the world. And I don't care what your political preferences are, whether you believe that we should have open borders or deport all immigrants. Anyone who is rational about the issue could admit that many Western countries in Europe, the United States, Canada, and others are having an integration issue when it comes to immigration and trying to figure it all out. And many civilizations and societies who have fallen in the past have done so because of this issue. And I'm not going to be here a doomer like so many talking heads online and say that this is the only issue. We're about to talk about 9 more in a second. And I also know throughout my study of history that many societies faced with similar crises have either integrated and figured it out or booted out the other culture and figured it out and lived hundreds or thousands of more years until their collapse for another reason. And Cormac McCarthy, in his Western Hexology, explores the unique crisis of evil that has been happening between the US and Mexico over the course of 150 years that has now resulted in the insanity that is going on right now. It is estimated that tens of billions of dollars is flowing from the US into Central and South America for illicit drug trading, human trafficking, other illicit goods, money laundering, weapons, and other things every single year. And if you look at the GDP of some of those countries, that's a lot of money, especially when it's untaxed. And then when you put on top of that, that many of these cartel groups have enough money to bribe officials and have crazy, insane modern weaponry that can dominate local populations, then it's an absolute mess. But McCarthy can talk about all of these issues without feeling like some woke liberal or some insensitive conservative, because he speaks in an atavistic, mythopoetic, and primordial voice. He can tap into this higher plane of consciousness with his writing that undercuts many of these polarization traps that we get into, and can show not only beautiful stories and what people are going through, but also the philosophical undercurrents of what's going on. Because what are the causal factors for these current crises here in America? And we can point to events and this and that, the war on drugs or whatever, but McCarthy takes it back to the conception of a new evil in America, in the American Southwest, that started with Manifest Destiny and us dominating local populations, and then ended with the Manhattan Project taking place once again in the American Southwest, which he explores in his novel The Passenger, where he calls the new evil we are all experiencing. It all started with the nuclear bomb, or I should say it ended there. It was the finest creation, or the atomic bomb. And so back in his 1985 novel, Blood Meridian, which many of you guys have heard about before, McCarthy tells the tale of these scalp hunters that are going into Mexico and are getting scalps for money. And they are just these immoral and terrible men. But the novel does a great job of exploring how it's not just the American scalp hunters that are evil, but the Mexicans are evil, the Apaches are evil. And he basically philosophizes that the land itself and the energy that we brought to it has become evil, giving these native groups horses and introducing them to this weapon that was the fastest vehicle in history until the train came around. Imagine that. The fastest vehicle in history for thousands of years was not the wagon or whatever, it was the horse. And giving native populations that got booted out of their homeland, like the Comanches and the Apaches, these strong motherfuckers from up north who got sent down south, giving them these horses and then letting them go and cause havoc on these more chill native populations like the Laguna Pueblo and others that really weren't war tribes, is an insane moment in history. And then having them turn that back on Mexican, Spanish, and American settlers is wild. And because America, and especially like the American Southwest, was one of the last places to be colonized in mass. And what's crazy is that some of the people who were doing that colonization were like Judge Holden in Blood Meridian, who were very well educated, who had read Hegel and Darwin and understood natural law and all of these different things. And the only thing that's scarier than a barbarian is a group of individuals who are educated and decide to go engage in immoral acts anyway. Because slavery, colonization, many of these things have been going on since the start of time, or at least of civilizations in general. But by the 19th century, many people no longer had an excuse to continue those practices because they had the education or the means to understand or open up emotionally and see what they were doing and why it was wrong. And so what compounds this even more in regards to the decay of civilization is that American culture for the past 100 years has been the dominant culture. And one of our most famous and iconic genres are Western film and books. And many of those novels are this nostalgic look back at that time. And many are way too romantic, way too character driven. And McCarthy subverts a lot of that by showing the pure violence at the primordial level and the tragedy of the colonization of the land. Because McCarthy doesn't take in his novels this Standing Rock, American Indian movement, we screwed over the natives type perspective. Instead, he shows figures trying to reach El Dorado, trying to reach some form of enlightenment. The kid in Blood Meridian is born from the Leonids and is a failed messianic figure. The two protagonists in the Border trilogy, John Grady Cole and Billy Parham, are Quixotean romantics seeking some better world, seeking the old world with horses and nature, romantic love stories, etc. Llewellyn Moss in No Country for Old Men comes across this random pile of cash, which could be his big break. The counselor in The Counselor loves his girlfriend so much that he wants to buy her a multi-million-dollar ring. And McCarthy doesn't write them with any interiority. Within all 5 of these novels, we get no interiority of almost any of these characters. What he does instead is combine this primordial voice and these crazy stories and times with this idea of civilizational decay in the American Southwest. And if you guys want to stop the decay and activate, then you should join the Right Conscious Book Club, which is the most active book club in the world. You will also get access to the Right Conscious Substack, which includes dozens of hours of courses on literature and writing. And the Right Conscious Book Club meets every single Saturday, and we talk about multiple books, including Cormac McCarthy. Once a month, we meet up and talk about one Cormac McCarthy novel. We read his entire bibliography every single year. And so if you are interested in Cormac McCarthy's works, for instance, in a couple weeks, we are reading Child of God and discussing it. But if you join the Substack, you also get access to my Cormac McCarthy course, which has over 30 hours of content, as you can see right here. And I'm always releasing new content over on the Substack. For instance, I just recently released, a video on how Cormac McCarthy wrote first drafts, where I got access to Cormac McCarthy's only first draft and show you guys his actual writing process, how he got from a first draft to a final draft and some of the decisions that he was making. And so if you aren't interested in that type of thing, I also have videos like this. For instance, 2 weeks ago, I released a video, Top 5 Novels About Conspiracy Theories. I also have free content over here. I understand that some of you guys don't like to pay people or just don't have money. And so I also put free content on Substack because Substack is the home of the literary renaissance. It is a promoter of free speech. And each subscription, whether free or paid over there, means the world to me. You guys have no idea how much your support helps me make better content. If you look at my older videos, I was able, because of support on Substack, to upgrade the set, to do deeper research. And one day, I won't have to be a teacher anymore and can do all this full time. And so I don't take any brand deals. I'm not really going to pitch you anything else in the rest of this video. So thank you for listening. And if you want to join or just go check it out or create your own Substack and post your own writing, it's the best place to do it. The link to mine is down in the description below. And so thanks for listening to my unscripted pitch, and let's get back to the video. Because we can talk about it all day, how we treated the Native Americans wrong, and we did. But over time, and this is what the epilogue of Blood Meridian is about, we continued to double down on the spirit, the individual spirit that led to the brutal colonization, with barbed wiring all of our lands, creating this farming and agricultural culture, which is awesome, but eventually started to die off itself, which was another loss of freedom. And why did we lose that? Ambition. Why are all the houses being bought up by BlackRock and other people right now? Because we've created a society with hyper ambition. Individuals prospering weren't enough, so we had to let corporate entities become humans and let them start to consume more than they'll ever need. It's the dark ghost of the individual, of capital. It's the dark ghost that's driving so many people to stress themselves out to get money, that they need drugs that come from Mexico or Guatemala. It's the type of culture that makes people, when they achieve status, want to give cocaine to all the girls on the boat. It's the type of society that lets Jeffrey Epstein get away with all of his stuff, because we care more about our ambitious figures than our actual constitution and morals. And even bigger than all of this, what McCarthy does in his Western hexology is track this new idea of evil. Because in Blood Meridian, someone like Judge Holden, who is conscious of what he's doing, that's really evil. That's no different than, a school shooter or someone consciously just going and killing people. Because Judge Holden is smart enough to know that these people aren't just barbarians or whatever, but he just wants to dominate the world, turn the whole world into a simulacra. And his project is continuing in the digital world, What do you think all this is, other than us creating a simulacra prison? Then in Cormac McCarthy's Border Trilogy, he shows us nostalgically that any return to nature, any primitivists out there are just being dumb. And so what's so awesome is that logically, if you listen to the bros out there, if you listen to everyone, oh, we need to return to an anarcho-syndicalist society, or we need to have democratic socialism like the Norwegian countries. When we boot out all the immigrants, we'll be able to afford it. And you hear all these ideas, but one of the biggest red pills that you can create for people is the idea that you can no longer have what people had for almost all of eternity, which is the ability to just go, and especially such a large land like we live in right now, to go live on the land, to go on adventure, the ability to connect with nature in a mytho-poetic way. Because all we have now is people worshiping technology or just running back to religion because there is nothing left to reintegrate into. There are not many non-hierarchical systems, which nature is the best of in terms of how humans relate to it, for us to be able to return to. Because it isn't about religion, because how many figures like Jesus and the Buddha and all these people returned or went out into nature to contemplate, to do these things, to individuate, to grow. Those opportunities are becoming less and less now. And when we do go out and do those things, most of the time it requires heavy interference. You can't live off the land anymore. You can't shoot a deer. You can't do any of that. I mean, you can, and I'm sure some people do. But we've created a society that was unsustainable for that lifestyle. But in the American mythos, for hundreds of years, that was possible for people to be able to do. And many of the stories that we read about Jack London, Samuel Chamberlain, even people like Hemingway, all these people who men love to read, they had something that we'll never have. But McCarthy shows that the pursuit of that is almost a selfish thing. Is something that can only lead to tragedy. And that's what happens to the characters in his Border trilogy. It is a major tragedy. And so that is one of actually the main reasons of civilizational decay. I mean, I can talk, like I said, we're talking about multiple things here, is that none of us right now can return to anything. We can return to concepts. We can return to mindfulness. We can return to Christ. But we can't return to an objective, tangible reality anymore, to heal, to grow, to create a community in. It's becoming more and more impossible. And without those things, without that process, which many of the time happened with travel, if you wanted to go to a different town or a different place as a man, you had to camp out on the road, travel different places, spend time contemplating on your horse or while walking, sometimes for weeks, months, even years at a time while you're in the army or any of that. It's all gone now. And that is the root of, that is one of the main threads of the social fabric. That is one of the catalysts of an honor code and all these different things that we are losing as a society right now, and replacing with government saying the police or whoever will take care of this for us. And in McCarthy's Border trilogy, he actually, it's so funny, he's so good. He is talking about nature. Nature has, in all 6 of these novels, this primordial presence. Like people always say, like, right setting as a character. McCarthy makes setting a character better than anyone else who has ever written before, even people like Herman Melville, and probably will be remembered as the goat of it, because no one has been able to spend the time and integrate into nature like McCarthy was able to, because he was born in this weird position between the new world and the old world. Anyway, so McCarthy shows in Blood Meridian and the Border trilogy the genesis of this evil, this individualism, and then why that spirit that built America, and many of us still hold in our hearts when we're having a crappy day at work or whatever, that's dead. And it's being replaced with something else. And No Country for Old Men with Anton Chigurh, the guy that says, call it. He's the replacement of that. He is this new genesis of evil. In Cormac McCarthy's Southern novel, Child of God, which I have over here, he talks about it's about a necrophiliac. And so one of McCarthy's main points in many of his later novels is talking about this new evil. In the Border trilogy, he told someone in the novel told a story about how down in Mexico, evil walks on 2 legs, that it's actually corporal in reality. And it's actually a very interesting part of desert mythology in general, that in these wastelands, in these arid places, like I live in Tucson right now, the mind projects very easily onto the landscape when it has nothing to input into it. And that gets compounded with high temperatures and wind and the bleakness. And so back to civilizational decline. The reason our immigration crisis is so bad is because there is a cartel problem and people don't want to live in Central and South America. And why do we have a cartel problem? Because we are the richest country in the world and we have a demand. We have a marketplace that is huge. And to expect that our neighbors, who are mostly native people, who, if you go back, what is it, 500-600 years ago when Cortez got here, the Mexica and the people of North and South America did not have the alphabet yet. They had language, but there was really no written language yet. They didn't have the wheel yet. The wheel was not invented in North and South America yet. That blew my mind when I learned that. I was like, damn, they really figured out how they build pyramids without a wheel? Holy crap. They didn't have horses. And then they got brutally colonized and never let to settle and kind of build their own infrastructure of information and culture. And they were given all these, Western ideals and synthesized some of them. But then later on were basically abandoned, and many revolted and created their own nations. But that was already by the late 19th century. They were already way behind so many other cultures in terms of infrastructure and development. And then if you look at the entire history of this 20th century and the social engineering, united fruit, us messing around with Central and South America, all the revolutions, what Russia was doing, it was an absolute mess. And so you have in Central and South America really cool people. I've spent a bunch of time in Central and South America, and I'm not sitting here saying, oh, people down there suck. But you have a situation where their economies aren't as strong as their neighbors. You have situations where there is power vacuums everywhere, governments changing, like a lot of problems. And so obviously, especially with the implementation of modern weaponry, aka machine guns, certain groups of corrupt, immoral individuals were going to take up that tens of billions of dollar offer. And eventually, many of them would get created and start feuding with each other and dominating the local population. And then when that local population felt squeezed and they know people who are dying and they feel unsafe, and there's a prosperous neighbor up north that's generally safe, of course they're going to want to go there. But the entire situation is the new conception of evil. We have a federal government with a fiat currency that is deciding en masse, much like in time immemorial, that its population doesn't have the right to experiment with its own consciousness. And so it's going to create drug laws. And then that same federal government is paranoid about its power and has to create intelligence agencies like a helicopter mother to try and control everything. And then those intelligence agencies and people who want to get into that, most of the time, aren't the best people, just like people who get into politics usually aren't the best. And then they start helping and trying to get drugs, or start messing around with the drug trade and trying to control it, which is what was happening for many decades. And so we have corrupt intelligence officers, we have corrupt governments on both sides of the aisle. Then we have people in America who are willing to bring these drugs in and risk going to prison and all of this, which usually aren't freedom fighters. They're not like Tim Leary or something like that. They're mostly not bringing in psychedelics. You can make psychedelics a lot of the time in America in mass. You can't make cocaine in mass without it, as easily without getting caught. Except you got a trap house. Who out there will be my trap queen? And then you have this other side of the aisle of these cartels, which are the immoral dudes who are just this, new mafia down there. And then in the middle zone, we have border patrol agents on both sides and government officials that are, some are, I'm sure, have very good intentions, but many don't make that much money and can be easily bribed. It's an absolute mess of a situation, but it is one of the main hotspots of civilizational decay. And for context, I live 25 minutes away from the US-Mexican border here in Arizona, and it's a wild place to live. It's wild to know that I've been camping before and overland camping and doing stuff, and I've seen coyotes leading people through the desert. One of my buddies at work actually stumbled upon a group of coyotes bringing like a bunch of 14-year-old girls, and they were just walking through the desert, and he called the border patrol, and luckily they got them, but all those girls were being trafficked. Where did those girls end up? In some random rich dude's basement, or God knows wherever else. And so we cannot live in a just, democratic, anarchist, communist, good society until that issue in general gets resolved. Not just the border crisis, but the immigration crisis. And I think that looking at the causal factors in a different way, which McCarthy does really well in all of his works, he isn't afraid to show how the government's involved and show the immorality of individual people and then local bystanders like getting screwed up because of it. Like he loves all of it. And he writes from a perspective that I think anyone could read it and get into it. Because the problem is that right now, if I say, hey, people coming from South and Central America are totally devastating the values of America and blah, 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 a lot of people would get triggered. But then if I said, we need to bring all of them over and they're doing nothing, they're having no influence on it at all, people would get triggered. People get triggered when I say America created the cartels. I mean, it's an endless conversation. And so I feel like through story, you can get a good picture because many of you guys aren't here. Like I am living this. I have students, I'm a high school English teacher who, because I'm so close to the border, many of my kids are from Mexico. Like at least half of my kids are, if not closer to 70%, are either immigrants themselves or children of immigrants. So I know many who have brothers in prison for life because they're in the cartel. I know many people who have had family, friends, or know people who've died because of cartel violence. From what I could tell, I've had kids, the way that they act, that they're probably going to be getting involved with crazy stuff when they get older. And so if you aren't as close, then reading and learning about this and having a nuanced perspective and contemplating it, especially its role and everything, is really important because America is the bastion right now of Western civilization. When you look at what we did with our Constitution and how we've helped elevate so many different groups of people, even if at times we've kept them down, like in slavery, indentured servitude, Jim Crow laws, and many other things, we've still helped a lot of people while sticking to our principles, sticking to many Enlightenment principles, Greek principles, all these things. Like America, you go to Washington, D.C., it's all Roman. Actually, if you look at the founding fathers, they wanted to create a new Rome. They wanted to create this new democracy built on Western principles. And so another trap, just really fast that people fall into when talking about Western civilization and the decay is, as I was saying earlier, and this is the whole men's movement, the red pillars, they think that we need to return to something old. But what we actually need to do is look at where we were supposed to evolve to, that if we kept on the same track, because I don't want us to go back to the old days. I don't want anyone to live in that mentality that disregarded women and all these different things. But we could look at if we evolved correctly without social engineering, without dark capital or communism or some of these major issues hurting us and throwing us off, where would we be? And that's where we should be trying to go instead of trying to go back to some, this nostalgic callback. Because no offense, Jordan Peterson is not the answer. The gym bros online aren't the answer. They aren't the right direction. I'm not the right answer. We are supposed to be somewhere. And as a collective, we need to try and get back to that. Because that's what Western civilization is. Just how over in the East and like Chinese culture and Indian culture, they have their own ideal. And just like, every culture, if it is functioning good, has a certain trajectory, and each has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. It's very easy. I hear a lot of people do this, all the time, like disregard, like let's say the Mexica. Oh, they didn't have wheels, they didn't have the alphabet, all this stuff, and those are huge things. Don't get me wrong, but they were evolving in different ways that we never did. And the same is true with what I've learned about India. And so now we have an opportunity for the first time to bring the strengths together of all civilizations and use that to reinforce what we have been raised with culturally. Like, I don't think that we should have ashrams and everyone should be meditating and giving their life to Ganesh or whatever. But I do think that many of the principles of mindfulness and some of that stuff can really help mitigate some of the ambition and some of the problems that we have over here in the West. And the same could be said about the East, that trying to dismantle and destruct a culture like we've been doing and to ourselves for the past 40 or 50 years is insane and never results in something very good, because to actually change a culture and head in a new direction is a very organic and slow process. And speaking of intelligence agencies, and another one of kind of these catalyst points where all of this happened, the next book on our list is Inherent Vice. And this is by Thomas Pynchon, and we recently read this in the book club. And this is an absolutely wonderful novel. The movie is decent if you've read the novel. It's somewhat confusing. I've known a lot of people that have seen the movie and are kind of like, WTF? Really good if you've read the book, though. And so this is actually Pynchon's second to last novel, and it takes place during the late 1960s, early 1970s in Southern California. And it follows a hippie noir detective, private investigator named Doc Sportello. And the reason that this is great is that it's basically the best book on kind of the hippie movement and everything happening during that time, in especially a negative light, because many of you guys have seen Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is absolutely great and somewhat subversive and kind of explores some of the darker underbelly of the entire hippie movement. But in general, I am a psychedelic advocate. I will talk about that more in a second. And so I'm not coming at this from some crazy puritanical angle. But from what I can tell, the hippie movement is a collective net negative. And one of the reasons that is because it was socially engineered by intelligence agencies. And I can let you go look that up and research that on your own. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But in general, one of the best things that you can have in a society is a bunch of passive people on drugs who think they are doing something by making art, but aren't really taking any real action to fix the problems in society. Because don't get me wrong, you guys. I love Jefferson Airplane, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, everybody. I'm a big fan of the era. I love Southern California. I mean, it's kind of a shit show now, but I grew up in Las Vegas and went to Southern California multiple times a year. Spent a bunch of time there after I graduated from high school, just bumming around, chilling with people. But if we want to look at the decay of Western civilization, California and the hippie movement are some of the biggest progenitors of that decay, especially modern things. So I don't even know where to start with this book because it basically hits on everything. So the novel is about this private eye, and his ex-girlfriend comes with him and says, I need you to look into this situation I'm having with my boyfriend. And her new boyfriend is some big real estate developer, which this novel touches on one of the biggest problems in the West, which, as I was talking about earlier, major corporations and these billionaires basically buying up all the housing and ruining our opportunity to live off of the land. Because when you look at Canada and Europe, and Europe is much smaller, their populations have basically been relegated to living in these fucking apartments and these townhomes or flats, which is fine. But over here in America, we have more than enough land for people, if we built the infrastructure out, not everyone, but a good amount of people to live on the land and to, go to their job and with a little bit of maintenance, be able to maintain a garden, some animals. And we have outright rejected that mentality. And part of the reason for that is that real estate developers have bought out this land and just jacked up the prices. And this novel, especially in Southern California, is a really great place to talk about civilizational decay because after slavery ended, eventually there was a great migration to the Northeast, and then eventually many black people came to California and set up shop there. But over the past 100 years or so, there has been a slow encroachment, first with real estate developers buying out, places outside of Compton like Gardenia and other places where a great line in this novel and in the movie, it's actually the guy saying it's played by Omar from The Wire. I don't know his name. He unfortunately died a couple years ago. Loved The Wire though. That's a great show about civilizational decay. Like if you want to talk about that, like The Wire showing how cities are just these corrupt places. But in the book, this black man who's in a gang, he goes to prison for a couple years and he comes back, he gets out and he's like, yeah, I'm out. And he goes back to his hood and no one's there anymore. Literally all his friends, his family, his entire gang, they're just gone. And it's just a bunch of yuppies living in the houses now because they all got bought out. And literally go to Zillow.com and go to Compton. Like go to Compton and you can find a house that looks like a crack house and it's $800,000 and it's 2 bedrooms, one bath, 1,200 square feet on fucking Fig Street, just like in the hood. It's crazy. And so people are, black people, I should say, and other groups are slowly being mixed around and have been for a long time because of gentrification. And I'm not going to sit here and say that gentrification is wrong or anything like that. But what it does do is create more tension, create political problems. For what end? For instance, in this novel, I'm going to be kind of talking about some spoilers here. This real estate developer is obviously doing all these immoral things and yada, yada, yada. But they are also social engineers that are giving this entire hippie Southern California, population drugs and then running the recovery center. Get you on the way in, get you on the way out. And so this novel is about the intelligence agencies' influence on hippie culture and kind of the pipeline of hippies becoming yuppies and the fallout of the hippie movement. Because what many people don't realize about psychedelics is that, guys, if psychedelics actually worked, we would live in a utopia right now. You know how many bros out there have taken LSD? I'm a changed man now. I feel empathy for the first time. I thought about my mother. All this stuff. But their choices, their actions don't reflect that. Their immorality, their life without any purpose, their life with no charity, with no forgiveness, with helping no one, just trying to live and get by. Maybe some small template of actions have changed, but their core structure hasn't changed, because all psychedelics do is show you the door, and then you have to energetically put in the work to walk through it. It can help give you some shortcuts to walk through the door, but climbing the mountain is still the hardest part. And the same is true with meditation. So many Silicon Valley bros meditated all throughout the mid-2000s and still created all these immoral things. Mark Zuckerberg loves jujitsu, which can be a cleansing thing for the soul, but he's still a fucking idiot. He's still an asshole. And it's interesting because many modern, especially men, feel this urge to be different. We're trained and programmed to be, once again, these individuals, to be different. And then we feel constrained by public school and our parents. And so then we take these psychedelics and we feel liberated for the first time. We feel seen. We feel like we have a purpose. But to create a better world, that's not enough. And that's why the entire hippie movement, where so many different people were taking drugs, didn't actually create a massive change in our culture. And in actuality, was one of the more predatory times in our culture. And this novel shows this beautifully, because the main protagonist, Doc Sportello, ends up looking for this real estate mogul who has gone missing, but on the way, obviously, like many Pynchon novels, which are postmodernist and feature so many different characters, he runs into so many other problems. And one of them is this dentist type figure who is sexually exploiting this underage girl by giving her drugs and yada, yada, yada. And when you actually look at the hippie movement, so many young girls and even boys fled their rigid Midwestern hometown because they were sold this dream. And the dream was being lived out by Alan Watts and Jerry Garcia and so many others. But on the bottom level, there were so many people ready to be exploited by egotistical and power-hungry individuals who put a flower in their hair and would rope people into an abusive relationship, into a cult, or whatever. And so this novel features multiple young women and men being exploited, which is something that you never hear about in the Woodstock documentary. Because the Manson family didn't just have the members it had when they killed Sharon Tate or whoever. There were many women who cycled through and escaped, who Charles Manson exploited. And if you go look at the stories of how they would program these girls coming from the Midwest, getting there for the first time, it's absolutely insane. And funny enough, the only reason that Jim Jones ever got enough power to start becoming friends with people like Willie Brown, who was Kamala Harris's ex and who got Kamala into politics, or Harvey Milk, if anyone ever saw the Sean Penn Milk movie. The only reason he ever got that power and could come down from Ukiah and start playing in San Franciscan political games is that after the hippie movement, so many people were distraught and had nowhere to go that they wanted a sense of return to what they once knew, which was kind of a simple Christian lifestyle with maybe some of the hippie elements there still. And Jim Jones and the People's Temple up in Ukiah, California, a couple hours away, was a really good funnel for them to fall into. You gave up your property and many didn't have any. You worked all day and were basically fed. No one was on drugs except Jim Jones. And yeah, and there were so many other groups very similar to the People's Temple that we just never heard about, that didn't, mass suicide 900 people. And so once again, returning to this idea that we talked about with Cormac McCarthy, the free love hippie movement just played on the same individualistic, malignant trope that when kicked down the street a little bit further just led to everyone becoming yuppies and not participating. Because our biggest problem right now as a society, what we've been plagued with since Woodstock, is we've lost our ability to take any real action. Now everything is performative. not just for social media, but for our own virtue signaling. But people aren't willing to actually enact real change and become the type of people to do it. And as we'll talk about later, we've become further and further enslaved in our mind and thrown into obfuscation, which is the number one way to dominate any culture, to destroy any culture. The number one reason why Western civilization is dying, or any civilization has died in history, is obfuscation, which is similar to confusion, but confusion is passive, like I'm confused, I don't know where I'm at, and it's personal. But obfuscating is someone intentionally confusing someone else. And so we were just talking about the immigration crisis and all that. That is confusing to so many people. And if you look at it rationally and aren't just like programmed to one side and react automatically because you hear talking heads online doing it, you can't figure it out really. And then you try and listen to people to figure it out, and you are further kind of thrown into this state of confusion. And the easiest thing to do is just hop on one of the hardcore polarization bandwagons, let them all in or throw them all out. But we've never escaped the obfuscation from this time. And I really like this book by Pynchon because it feels confusing at times. Doc Sportello is stoned and on many various drugs throughout this entire novel. And it's a really good kicker. Even though all these novels, like I said, are kind of showing the fall, I think that it's good to see and it's entertaining to see in a story, especially when you can put the pieces together. Because for so long, I thought people liberated themselves. But what actually happened was they just became fantasy addicts, seekers of pleasure over morals. And so I could go on all day about the family structure breaking down and crazy policies being put in place and the rebound effect that we eventually had with Reagan from all this, which helped in some ways and then also created other problems like ending mental health asylums, which has led to a lot of our homeless problems, starting the war on drugs, which created more problems on the border and increased prison populations and so many other things. It's just been vroom, vroom. And one could also argue that the confidence that these intelligence agencies had in the 60s and 70s with the crazy MK Ultra experiments that they were doing eventually led to some of their overconfidence in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, especially in the Middle East. Because if you can program a population to become passive and let the Vietnam War go on, especially some educated population, it must be really easy to control those dumb Afghanis, right? It must be really easy to control those Iranians. And so somehow in almost every Pynchon novel, he touches on everybody. Touches on corporations, conspiracies, pedophile rings, Israel, like everything in his modern novels. And so one last note, I don't really see this entire era as a big bastion against nihilism, because one of the big reasons that Western civilization is in decay, and we're going to talk about so many more, is just there is a general air of pessimism that if we are going to uphold things, that there has to be a structure and people believing in it. And when enough people stop believing in it for whatever reason, because they're overthinking, then it just ceases to exist or matter anymore. And so you would hope that this super positive movement where people were taking consciousness, expanding drugs, spending more time in nature and all this would have produced a shift in art for at least a while, for generations. And we could have gotten out of that bleakness. We could have continued making art like what Tom Robbins was doing. If you guys like the author Tom Robbins, who I absolutely love, he shows the perfect evolution of where the hippie movement should have gone. He's probably the best example of a writer and a really good example of a human. But instead, we went into darker and less purposeful realities. And so I will cut myself off right there, you guys. I could do 5 hours on this. But if you guys are into anything related to what I just talked about, you have to go check out Inherent Vice. The movie is also good, by Paul Thomas Anderson, who is releasing another Pynchon movie this September. And so moving forward. So next we have The Map and the Territory by Michel Houellebecq. And I haven't talked about Houellebecq very much, but he is one of my favorite living authors. He has become much more controversial over the years, which I honestly like. I like to see people rock the boat a little bit. He is one of the closest people we have to a literary celebrity, even though he is weird at times and there's like a lot going on with him. But this selection, and I'll just tell you what I'm talking about in terms of decay, is about becoming too self-aware. One of the biggest problems that we have, and it could go back to the paralysis I was just talking about and people not taking actions. I could connect it to the mental health crisis, the crisis in relationships, and so many other things. The health crisis is people have become too self-aware. We have become too sensitive, too emotional, and cannot handle it, do not have the tools and abilities to function with it. And even worse, there is an archetype of human, and we're going to break from this idea of becoming too self-aware, who is hyper-rational. I like to call them logic bros because, and there are so many in the literary community. It's so sad, you guys. My least favorite people in the world are not crazy, judgmental religious people or cranky old people. It's actually logic bros because I know exactly how they are going to think because they are thinking through logic all of the time. There is a subpopulation of the people who, for whatever reason, as a youngster, became addicted to logic. They maybe never had religious experiences or are autistic or I don't know. And I was actually like this. I wasn't really raised religious. I didn't have really any big spiritual experiences. I only have one sister and she's like 5 years older than me or 4.5 years older than me. And we really didn't spend that much time together. And so I was basically just kind of by myself a lot on the internet reading. And I like knowledge. And instead of earlier in life, like focusing as much on athletics, because I was so lame, you guys. So my dad's from Canada. He immigrated to the United States. I'm a son of an immigrant and I'm a Canadian citizen. I've actually been thinking about moving to Canada, but that's a whole other story. And so I grew up playing ice hockey for a while, but then I was like, dude, I'm done with this when I was 10. I was like, I don't like team sports. And so then I got into running and golf, which aren't that social of sports, at least before you get to high school and you're just doing it like on club teams or whatever. And so in that isolation, I became this logic bro. I use my mind as a weapon. And I viewed the entire world through this pessimistic and cold way. And when I read Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and all these people, I saw the liberating elements in them and it made me feel better, but I had no moral code. And I could use logic to basically justify all that. And I missed out on so many good aspects of life and relationships and ruined so many friendships that I can't get back anymore because of that. But I stopped that at age 18. When I was 18, I got 2 concussions that knocked me out clean in like 2 months' time. The first one I got longboarding, and then I thought I recovered and I went skiing up in Snowbird in Salt Lake City. I was going to college in Utah, and I was zooted out of my mind on a powder day on the Little Cloud lift and doing a partial powder day. And I was zooming fast through moguls and then tomahawked, just kind of fell. And I didn't necessarily realize I kind of did that. When you have a really bad concussion, it's easier to knock yourself out again. So boom, I'm waking up to my friend shaking me and I'm super nauseous up at 12,000 feet. Like, what happened? But those basically rendered my logic useless for 6 or so months. And I couldn't read, I couldn't think, I couldn't write. And so I just fell. All I did was just meditate, smoke a lot of weed, and work this crazy hookup security job in Vegas. For 2 years of my life, I worked security jobs in Las Vegas that we just didn't show up at. Shout out American Security, who are called something else in Vegas, but we would get these security jobs on construction sites where you were supposed to watch it all night or all day, and we would just show up at the start time and then drive back home and then show up at the end time. But that coupled with probably 100 psychedelic experiences and getting in relationships and meditating and learning to unconditionally love and do so many other things broke that spell out of me. And sometimes I go full logic bro still, like it's in me at all times. It's like the disease in my heart. And I feel so weird bringing it out. Like, for instance, when Vincenzo Barney wrote the Cormac McCarthy piece about him dating a 16-year-old, he got so many things wrong. And he was like wearing his laurels and like going on a parade and getting all these interviews. And I remember I just trashed him. I went full logic bro and pointed out every single inaccuracy in the article, and like the comment went straight to the top. And I was like, dude, I hate to do this, but you're really screwing up the situation. But there are other people in every single interaction. When there are people on watching this YouTube video right now who have already commented below who have this logical reaction to everything I'm saying. They have a logical reaction to everything. And at times you should use logic. It's a really good framing for so many different parts of reality. But there are so many other ways to frame reality. But so many of our leaders and countless men and now women hyper-rationalize everything. And funny enough, Cormac McCarthy, that was one of his main themes. What is, connecting it all back? This is the fall of Western civilization. What did Judge Holden do? Judge Holden was hyper-rational about everything. He wanted to contain the entire world in Simulacra so he could rationalize and objectify everything. In No Country for Old Men, what does Anton Chigurh do? He's the most hyper-rational of everyone. He does a coin flip. 50-50. Call it. That's hyper-rationality in its most malignant form. And then in McCarthy's last two books, The Passenger and Stella Maris, it features a genius named Alicia Western, who is this physics prodigy, but she hyper-rationalizes everything, and it drives her into schizophrenia. And in the book, he provides countless examples of other scientists that went the same way. And when I think of all the engineers and scientists, and some of them are great, but many of them that I know, their rationality just has rendered their body, their soul, their spirit absolutely useless. But I've seen the same thing happen down in poverty. I know so many people in poverty, got to pay the bills, I'm like, can't you think about this? Like, let's look at this from this angle. Do this. What? I can't do that. And it's their rationality, their street smarts, quote unquote, that is holding them down. Not just for, a monetary shift in their life, but also a spiritual, emotional, or physical shift in their life or health. And this logic broiness is the reason why there are so many red-pilled men that want nothing to do with women. Because I'm going to give you guys a pro tip right now. Using your rational brain while in a relationship, and it's crazy, sometimes isn't the best idea, because I do irrational things all the time too. My wife has to put up with all my irrational dreams and ideas and plans, my spontaneity. Hey, it happened the other day. I was like, hey, my wife was like, hey, because we live outside of Tucson. She's like, hey, I really want to drive into town and grab a coffee and grab something to eat, as a treat. And I was like, cool. And then as we're going into town, I was like, oh my God, we're already here. I have this return I need to do, and we'll go to Costco. Then we'll get coffee and something to eat. I was like, I'll speed run Costco. I'll be there for 10 minutes. And then I was in the UPS store for 10 minutes in a line. And by the time we got to the place where we were going to get the food, my 8-month-old daughter was having a meltdown. And we're like, dude, we got to get out of here. We got to get home, because if we stay here and then try to put her back into the car, it's going to be 5 times worse. I should have used my rational brain and prioritized. But relationships are breaking down because of this. Almost every single divorced man that I know is a logic bro. She was just crazy. And sometimes people are crazy. Don't get me wrong. And I have respect for people who get divorced. I understand it's a really hard situation. I'm not trolling them. I really meant to say I know so many men who are single and refuse to get married or try to find something stable. And when you hear them talk, it's just pure logic. Well, what if I get canceled? What if I get in too deep? They're going to take half my money. I've worked so hard for my success. All my time and individuality is going to go away. Oh my God, we're going back to the same problem as I've been discussing. And so this is all a prelude to me talking about this novel, because it explores all of this and more. And so this features Jed Martin, who is this hyper-rational artist. And it's funny because he does exquisite photography and paintings of maps and territories. And his art is very analytical and detached. And it's basically this big metaphor, or his art symbolizes our growing detachment from actual reality through representation. And so you've maybe been hearing me say the word simulacra, and I've been a bad teacher to you guys, and I need to always introduce the definition of that word at least. A simulacra is a copy of a copy. Right now, what you are watching is a simulacra. And if you take a piece of my advice and then implement it in your own life, let's say you find this video useful and then you repeat something, well, that is a simulacra of a simulacra of a simulacra. And then the chain goes on, because right now you are watching a copy of me speaking in the present moment. And so it's crazy when you start to look at the chain of events or the chain of simulacra and how much simulacra is around us. And for so many things in our reality, we have no idea where the origin is. And in time immemorial, that wasn't necessarily the case. You knew where these things came from, your thoughts, your feelings, the lamp, the walls. They're like, yeah, it was built from this wood that came from this forest that John gave me. And so we've now entered into a state of hyperreality, because the amount of simulacra that is floating around us, compounded by the influx of an impossible amount of information to process that's ever increasing because of AI and more humans every single day, online mostly, and also in person. We've entered into a reality, Jean Baudrillardian style, where almost nothing is real anymore, and reality and representation are ever increasing in distance. And so this novel is about that. And when you want to think about civilizational decay, that is one of the major things, because a pillar of Western civilization, something that we have not obviously lived up to, it's kind of hard to live up to, is natural law, objective truth, the belief in that, Enlightenment ideals, even what Greek philosophy and Christianity has been talking about for the past 2 millennia. And in general, our barbarous ways, the crude way we are living, basically made it impossible to live those things out in reality, honestly. But now that we have nuclear bombs, a nuclear deterrence, now that we live in an economy with so much money and space for freedom, you would think that we would start to try and figure out how to bring more objective truth and morality into our life, not to even say that it exists. Because the logic will say objective reality doesn't exist, but that it's the only way that we can live in a non-violent society, at least as much as we can, a society that minimizes suffering. Because what's interesting is that we make as Western civilization moves forward, and we have more and more opportunities because of the internet to be free, there are less and less excuses of why we can't figure this out. Honestly, you guys, I have a pretty low chance, and I could have a bad day. Maybe I'll end up on the news or on some Reddit thread and they'll attach this statement to it. But in general, I have figured out how not to be a violent individual. I have figured out how to let people insult me in person, even do crazy things to me in person, and leave the situation without being a reactionary. Crazy. I've learned to transcend many of my instincts. Sometimes I fall prey to them. But in general, in public, in my professional life, I hold it together and I make mistakes, but they're very, very minor. Like at my job, I may be petty with a student or something, but that's just life. I'm not hurting anybody, but most people in America and in the world are one stressful situation away from just losing it and are 2 steps away from losing their entire morality, which they don't really even have anyway, but whatever semblance of one they do have. And we spend 10,000 hours with students and over $100,000 on education for pupils in most Western countries. And we teach them all this random stuff that they mostly don't learn. And we spend almost 0 time trying to make them good people, talking about conflict and nonviolence and so many of these different things, and learning how to actually become a person who is nonviolent and can physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally constrain themselves. We spend no time on that because, that's too woo. I mean, and it is, and it moves into crazy territory that schools shouldn't have to do, but parents have refused to do because they don't want to have to do that work themselves. The hardest thing that you can do is take this journey up and transcend your instincts, because you're going to have to leave so much at the door. You're going to have to go through so many dark nights of the soul and do so much to get through it. And is it really worth it? Well, I think that it is, but for many people, it's not, because to go through that existential crisis usually means that you have to have a dip in your lifestyle. You have a crisis. Many of us, many of you guys watching this have already gone through that. And so what Jed is experiencing is hyper-rationality, but another way to think about it is hyper-detachment, that these logic bro individuals first stop detaching from their own emotions and what they are feeling, usually because of trauma or they just become addicted to it, and then it becomes easier to detach from everything else. And so this coincides really well, and Welbeck is kind of making this metaphor to consumer capitalism, because I was just talking about Jean Baudrillard a second ago, and I have a really great Jean Baudrillard playlist if you want to go check it out if you are into him. I have a really good video titled Jean Baudrillard on Modern Worker Exploitation, and I'm planning this video to be over 2 hours, and we're on minute 55 right now, and so I'm probably not going to remember to put the link in, but maybe someone below in the comments can remind me, and I will. Jean Baudrillard on modern worker exploitation. But when you look at the logic of the average consumer, or I should say consumer capitalism, objects and experiences only become valuable when they become reproduced and commodified as these representations. That's what's happening all across social media and so many other places. And so, as consumers, we have to internalize this, and it's a decay because our experience as humans is reduced to data, to fake services, to the visualizations, and we have less and less things that are authentic and immediate. My favorite word when it comes to all this is anticipation. In our suburban sprawl or in our cities, we no longer have any form of anticipation, because if I had to ride my horse 4 hours to go to Costco or the local store, on the way, all types of stuff could happen. It's like a Red Dead Redemption game. I could get robbed. There are random people, like anything could happen, and it's constant anticipation. And just anticipation, even just of the weather. And so this book is wild because Welbeck actually places himself, like a dude named Michel Welbeck, into the novel in this weird metafictional move to kind of drive the point home, too, that all art has fatigued us. One of the big problems with a literary renaissance or waking people up is, how do we really get it going, you guys? Like, I want to help new authors. I want all of us to go full time and be out there and be literary celebrities. And that is my goal, to motivate someone or a group of people to be able to take us to the next level as a culture over the next couple of decades, to make our generation meaningful in the history of literature and in the arts. But one of the most fatiguing things and one of the biggest areas of decay is art. The amount of art that's out there that's not only crappy but also great has basically rendered philosophy, language, music, and thus aka meaning, useless. And so many artists have gone down. So many talented thinkers that I know, a lot of who are very emotional or hyper rational, have gone down because they feel like there is no point to writing. Many of you guys, like, why aren't you writing? Why aren't you doing something important or like purpose driven? You probably have some excuse why you've given up and why you aren't doing something, most likely related to it's just kind of useless. There's no point. There's already all this stuff out there and AI and all of this. And so what's interesting is this novel is critiquing it. It's showing that mentality perfectly. And I think hopefully showing that there is a purpose in the modern world, that doing something is important. And to take this even deeper, the largest prison of all that Welbeck presents is that we've decayed to the furthest level because for a long time, our thoughts, our private life were important. If you look at like Western ideals in general, it's actually kind of a big thing, especially like in America, separation of church and state. But Welbeck explores that our thoughts themselves have become commercial entities, that our consciousness is no longer private and sacred, but is marketable, is able to be manipulated, can be measured, can actually be used as a commodity. Why do you think politicians spend billions of dollars on advertisements? Why do you think the advertising market is so large? And so what's interesting is that Welbeck is arguing that this liberation of making everyone kind of post-literate and somewhat educated, which is where we're at in the West right now, and even in the East, isn't actually a good thing, because all it's made us become is actually just flattened. It's ruined all the anticipation and animism of our life and just made it very easy for us to be commodified and manipulated. Because if the pathways in your brain and in your consciousness don't run very deep and you're not really a free thinker, then someone can crack your code. Like I was saying earlier, as you start to educate yourself more, people who haven't really gone anywhere with their thinking in life are like white belts in jiu-jitsu. Sometimes when you roll with a white belt, which is like a beginner in jiu-jitsu, and you're like grappling with them, sometimes they do something so spazzy and random that it actually works, usually just for a second. They move in a certain way that no one would ever think to move. It's just dumb, but it works in that moment and you're thrown off guard. And most people are like that. Most people have things about them that are special, and at times they can break free. But in general, they then just flatten out, and the jiu-jitsu and white belt does something dumb, and then I'm choking them out. And our job is, to get the black belt in life and in thinking, and to have all these pathways of thinking so that we can't become flattened, because the more flat we are, the easier it is to take us. So this novel and this idea runs really deep, and it's something we'll be talking about a little bit more. But, Dostoevsky and so many others foresaw what hyperconsciousness was going to do. And what's funny is if you look at Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, John Berryman, Proust, a lot of them lived terrible lives and killed themselves or weren't really people you wanted to be around. And they were kind of the progenitors of this deep consciousness. And consciousness, when taken too far without integration, without animism, without anticipation, it easily can become a curse. You can very easily become the underground man. And so this novel right here shows how, because of hyper commodification, because of us being fatigued and exhausted by so many different aspects of life, we have detached ourselves. We have forsaken our responsibilities of being conscious, human beings. And it's a disaster. It's terrible. I could rant about this book too for like an hour. And I feel like we'll be touching lightly on some of these themes again. So I'll save some of my ideas for later on, but let's keep moving. So next on our list is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And so many people are turned off by this novel because they think it's about a man getting with a young girl. And that is just kind of the general plot point. But in actuality, it's about so much more. And Nabokov's actually making a huge critique of Western civilization and trying to teach us one of the most important lessons out there through this novel. And so if you go watch the Stanley Kubrick film or the 1990s one, you won't get any of that message. You will just see kind of Lolita and Humbert's relationship glorified, and it's just kind of weird for all the weird people. But the book is totally different, especially if you are reading it in the way that Nabokov was trying to present it, which in the novel, it is a memoir. Or one can say a confession of Humbert, who is the older professor who gets with Lolita. And the framing of the novel, the introduction, is by a psychoanalyst who is discussing this memoir, who is looking at it. And in general, what Nabokov is trying to say is that we allow style and personality, flourishes, whatever you want to call it, not just in dress, but in personality, to let people get away with so much. Because throughout the novel, as you were reading this, Nabokov picked the most asinine thing as his topic, which is a man getting with a 12-year-old girl. Like, that is horrifying, like Jesus Christ. But he uses that as an anchor to try to convince you that this Humbert guy isn't so bad. And so throughout the novel, Nabokov, who is one of the greatest stylists of all time, is writing this beautiful story about their relationship. And if you don't kind of keep yourself in check, you will get drawn into the story and be like, wow, because the way that Humbert is writing about it makes it seem like a fairy tale. But what's so crazy is that Nabokov knows that you're going to keep on guard. Nabokov knows that you're not going to allow yourself, hopefully, to get consumed into that storyline. But because you're so focused on that, he makes Humbert do other immoral things or odd things that over time the reader may accept because they're so focused on this one issue. And it's so smart because eventually you'll realize it. Eventually, many of the problems earlier in the novel, not to spoil, that you've maybe let slip become a big problem later. And then you realize that you've been duped by style, that we allow so many people to get away with so much, not just because of style, but also because of psychology. And so this book is a critique of personality and the lack of accountability that we now have because of psychoanalytic thought. Because when we see someone who has problems, who is complicated, Kurt Cobain, or like whatever figure you want to talk about, who is like toxic and weird, John Lennon, whoever, we make so many excuses for their action, and we look back at their past. And Humbert will do this. Humbert gives you this backstory that literally is the perfect Freudian map for someone who would become a pedophile. He gives you the exact things that happened to him, all these traumatic events and all these things that make it really easy to be like, oh my God, it's not his fault. And people do this all the time. Everyone has a million excuses for why they are what they are, why they are depressed, why they are angry, why they are abusive, why they are so many of these different things. And then they reinforce this, and this has actually become a bigger problem now with all these psychological buzzwords. Oh my God, no, you're gaslighting me. No, these are my boundaries. No, this is that. They have all these words and excuses, and framings, and they try to make you focus on their more complicated parts or on their flourishes to not make you see the actual vulgarity, the actual deep issues that they have. And this is immense, you guys. Like, this issue is insane because I'm not going to sit here and say that people in time immemorial were these great people. But as I was just talking about earlier, we have now, because of education, we have now lifted everybody into some form of consciousness and education. And now people can consciously start not just making immoral decisions, but creating a fence, creating a army of excuses to defend against people who are trying to penetrate and examine them for who they actually are. And what this has done has not only just screwed so many people over who get roped into bad situations, it's actually created a loss of trust. So one of the our big problems in Western civilization right now is that we have little to no trust in each other. We have no sense of community. And there can be no honor code. There can be no social fabric without trust. But when there are so many screwed up people out there who use their style, their excuses, whatever, to help deflect some of their malignant aspects. And we've had many heroes like go down, and we've watched, and looked at many people in the past that we love and people in our own personal life. I don't know if you've ever had someone in your life who has done something terrible and then use the set of excuses to, overcome it and make people believe that they are different. But it's terrible to watch, especially if you know what is going on. And it actually creates trust problems down the road. It makes you think that the world is a certain way when it shouldn't be, or it actually isn't. And so this is why this novel is absolutely fire, because now we have so many cults of personality, which are fine, but most of the time their goal isn't something transcendent. It isn't something important. I have a second channel, if you guys don't know, it's called the Literary Renaissance channel. And over there, I am trying to help writers and readers activate so that we can create a literary awakening. And one of my big pushes right now is that one of my big talking points is that we have no literary celebrities, like zero. Like, who is it? Michelle Welbeck, Neil Gaiman, he's gone. Chuck Palahniuk, George Saunders, they're snoozers. If I go watch one of their interviews or hear them talk, it's boring, bro. J.K. Rowling, she's a YA fantasy author. She's the biggest celebrity that we have. But what's being shown to us in Lolita is that our hero worship has led us astray, and it continues to. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't idolize heroes and lift people up and have transcendent figures that lift our community up, because right now we don't have any. And we're going down a nihilistic, bleak rabbit hole as a literature and writing community, and it's terrible to watch, and we may never recover. But what everyone needs to remember is that just because people right now are bad, and you watch and we just heard me talk about Jim Jones, and CoffeeZilla makes videos on all the grifters online, doesn't mean there can't be authentic individuals out there who are literary celebrities that are these terrible people that can't really help things, because we really do need them, especially in the realm of literature, which is the most transformative artistic medium. Getting someone to read a 250,000 word novel can change their life completely, can redirect so many thoughts. And then if there's added support, if there's added interest in the person and what they are doing and their influences, I can't even imagine what will happen to people if they make contact with that. But what's interesting is outright we have rejected this as a community. And we are actually way further behind than the other artistic mediums. So as writers have basically said, we're not going to change, and we just want publishing deals to support us, or we just want to post our book on Amazon, and I want Amazon's algorithm to somehow figure out how to make 10,000 people buy this. That has been our attitude. As visual artists, filmmakers, musicians have figured out how to continue to be independent and have produced, all in their own right, thousands of independent celebrities. There are thousands of micro-genre musicians who are full-time and did it with no record deal, all on their own. A lot of the time, sometimes they're like 16-year-olds from Norway doing it. And they put everything into it and will sacrifice and put their entire self into their work and share everything. But over here in the writing world, we have outright refused to do that. We have refused to look at what we need to do. So first step is we need to write better than our predecessors. We need to stand on their shoulders, because if we're not writing better than people in the past, then why would people care? But that should be easier than ever, because we have access to all the information basically ever compiled that still exists online. You can go to a shadow library and read have tens of millions of books at your fingertip in a click. There are resources like AI or writing groups in person and online that can help you get really good at writing really fast. It's not hard. It's not that hard to do anymore. But because we gained that ability for anyone to become a good writer, what did we have to pay for it? Well, what we had to pay for it was that we now have to learn as authors to be social, how to not just put ourselves out there, but explain to people why our work matters. And even crazier, the highest level of art, be able to write something that we think is important to write and still make it great. Because if you sit down right now and you don't work off artistic inspiration, you say, I'm going to write a novel about blank. Most likely it's not going to be as good or even close to as good as if you wrote something about, running off artistic inspiration. But if you got so good at writing that everything you wrote was good and you were willing to take a 30% quality cut to write about something important that you know that you can talk about, that you know people will resonate with, that's the highest level of art right now, especially in the writing world. And no one is doing that. People are trying to do it, but it's not really working. And so what we are being asked to do as writers, to not fall into this Humber archetype, to save Western civilization, is to become figures that have problems, that make mistakes, but don't have the skeletons in the closet like so many literary celebrities have had. For instance, Neil Gaiman. If you are going to become a literary celebrity and do this, and you are a man, you are going to have more women in your DMs, no matter if you are ugly, fat, from whatever country, then you know what to do with. You're going to have instant access to women who are going to want to have sex with you for nothing. You're not going to have to, you could take them out to dinner, but all the things that you think you need to do, you aren't going to need to do. And you can do that, but as your aura continues to grow, all of that will eventually circle back to get you. As you become this celebrity, you could get all these brand deals and get involved with all these people in these corporations, but eventually that will hurt your reputation and people trusting you. There are like a million traps along the way, especially just like going crazy because you are like trying so hard to get your message out there that it's a dangerous road and it's a hard road. It's an uncharted road. And we need literary greenhorns who are willing to do this and actually have fortitude on that path. And we haven't had that many yet. And so that's why I selected Lolita. I think that it is a great analysis of what we let artists and people who make excuses get away with, especially if they know how to work around it. But it also, I think, hopefully, as I'm explaining now, should be motivational for us to do better, to not lose trust in everything and everybody and in this process, and lift people up. We need someone to do it. Is it going to be you? Who's it going to be? We're not all going to collectively wake up and become better. It doesn't work like that. You need leaders in your society to lift everyone up. And so that is probably a pretty wild take on Lolita that you weren't expecting. But continuing forward. So next we have The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is one of the best American short story collections of all time. Tim O'Brien is a fantastic writer. I just reread this with one of my classes this year, and it was spectacular. Like, I had to resist crying in front of the class because they would, obviously give me shit. Mr. Kawnak's crying. But I mean, it was like moving. I was reading it and I was like, I would make other kids read so I could just process. I was like, holy crap. I read this first back when I was in high school or early in college. But The Things They Carried is about the Vietnam War. And it is a collection of interlinked short stories following these characters and their life before, during, and after the war. And it is spectacular. And if we want to talk about the decline of Western civilization, one of the main reasons is just the amount of random wars, especially Western powers that include, I should just say that, in the last 100 years that the United States and Russia have engaged in. Vietnam was a proxy war between us and Russia, but we've engaged in wars in the Middle East. Russia was involved in Afghanistan and in other places. Obviously, Russia's engaged in Ukraine right now and wasting a lot of money and lives. And instead of focusing on the numbers and listening to Ben Shapiro tell you peace through strength, or Scott Horton giving you some libertarian anti-war monologue, or Bernie Sanders, going on some rant about wars, why not listen to the actual experiences of people who are dying in these wars? The over 50,000 American men that died in Vietnam and what they were going through, but not just where they were going through, but where they came from and where they were going after the war. All the men who died from suicide, all the men who died from Agent Orange, and all this stuff after the war. We never talk about. We never talk about what the war on terror did not only to our country in terms of our economy and our standing in the world, but what it did to families. I know people who've been to the war, who were in the war on terror and were never the same for absolutely nothing. And our obsession with war and this peace through strength idea, our obsession with the Middle East and all of that, has basically let our world become more and more evil and let powers rise up. We could have, if we did not get involved in countless wars, Russia still would have fallen. And we could have kept Russia and China in check. We could have kept them much weaker than they are now and actually had better relations at the same time. But instead, our focus on all these random wars and polarizing ourselves in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Middle East, and so many other places has not only, it's just been an absolute disaster. And when I think when we look back, as I was talking about intelligence agencies, you know, if America fails, if Western civilization fails, people will look back in history books and say, why the hell were they getting in all these conflicts? What were they doing? I mean, in American history, you could look back and maybe since the War of 1812, every single war could have been avoided and America still would have become the best nation on earth. And I know that's a controversial statement. And like I said, it's a thought experiment. Like it would be very impossible and would require a lot of different elements to happen. But nonetheless, we are obsessed with war. And, you know, that goes back to Blood Meridian, as I was talking about before. That, I mean, McCarthy says in that war is God. He has Judge Holden go on this entire rant. And America has been one of its best adherents, especially for being a new country. You know, countries like Europe have been infighting with each other forever. Same in the Middle East. But we just hopped onto the block, pulled it together really fast and have hit the ground running. As places like Austria and other European countries that were warlike for such a long time are basically now just tourist attractions. They're just, weak states that don't care about war anymore. But I view in general the entire Vietnam War, maybe the war on terror too, especially because we lived it and now we're seeing the ramifications in the Middle East, as one of the more tragic things. And I think that Tim O'Brien has the best anti-war book, or really one of the best books on war ever, especially modern war. You know, books on World War II and World War I are different to me because they were these big naval battles and open field battles, and war isn't necessarily fought like that anymore. And even worse, a lot of people didn't mind going into World War I or World War II. A lot of people minded getting drafted into Vietnam. A lot of people after the fact were like, what the hell were we doing in the Middle East? And I think that narrative is one of the best ways to explore war. And I also think, unfortunately, not many good books, or good novels, I should say, have been written on the war on terror. So I have to pull us back to this collection of short stories to really show what was happening and the mentality. Like I said, it's a wild novel. It's a wild book. And I get the argument that people say we need war and we can't live without it. But as I was saying earlier, our job as the years go on is to learn with this access to information how to transcend our base instincts, how to move up the chakras, how to tap into Christ consciousness. It's easier than ever to do. We have more access, but we continue to fail to do it en masse. Because that was the promise of many of the Enlightenment principles. Even, some Greeks thought like this, that eventually we could educate the people to be good, to be just, to live, not in a utopia, but to live in a decent world. Do you feel like we are heading away or toward that? I feel like we are heading away from that. And so if you are a hawk, if you believe that many of the wars that we've been in since World War II have been just and necessary, then this is a good place to start emotionally opening you up, because sitting and doing the research and looking at it analytically instead of looking at what's actually happening to people, and the same goes with wars happening today, isn't the best way to look at what's going on. And it's nice to do that, and it's nice to have that logical information. But if you don't know the experiences, it's just statistics. But maybe people don't care about stories, when it comes to this stuff. There's also a fatigue. That's one of the other reasons with all the death, so many people, and it doesn't really matter how you feel about this, don't care about what's happening in Gaza right now or whatever war. I mean, we are obsessed with the Middle East and Ukraine, but there's civil wars happening in Africa and other places. And we've just become generally desensitized to seeing dead bodies on X and children dying or drones killing people, or, more people died. Like, we just don't really care anymore. And stories are available for us and we just outright reject them because we don't want to deal with it. And so this is a nice way to kind of lean into it without kind of the crazy polarization of today. And it's a tactic I recommend, that getting involved with arguments, especially in the present, about Israel versus Palestine and blah, blah, blah. Who's right? Oh my God, there's dead children in Gaza, but Hamas are terrorists and they killed 1,200 in Israel. What do you expect them to do? All this stuff is just a mess. But if you look back in time and explore those conflicts, it can really help you stay more rational and really help let you have the space to dive into things, because no one really cares how you feel, what your opinion about Vietnam is and what you're exploring in that. But your opinion, if I gave some opinion on Gaza or Israel right now, someone in the comments would freak out and say something. And so I view books like this as just kind of hate to use the word, safe space to kind of start leaning into differing philosophies than the crazy warmongering path we've been on for a while. And there is great journalism. I just really, before we move on, I just want to say too that some stuff that can really open your heart is reading about veterans, reading some novels about post-war people coming back from wars and what they deal with, like explorations of their life, and hearing all that, and then hearing how we abandon our veterans. Because we got to go to war. We got to go to Vietnam. We got to go do this conflict, save democracy. Great. How do we treat everyone after? Okay, we have to go help, create a democracy in Afghanistan and Iraq. Great idea, George and Barack Obama. Okay, great. Let's do it. Great idea, Jocko. Okay, but how are we treating everyone after the fact? What resources do they have? And definitely not enough. The VA, especially for what so many people gave, is a joke. So next we have White Noise by Don DeLillo, and this is somewhat of a build off of what I was talking about earlier with The Map and the Territory by Michel Houellebecq. But Don DeLillo is one of the best living novelists right now, one of the best American novelists of all time, and is a master of really showing our decaying state in the West. Whether it's in Mao 2, which I think is over here right outside the shot that I've talked about before, Ratner's Star, Underworld, Libra, so many others. He's absolutely great at it. And so White Noise is basically about the white noise that all of us have, all the excess of information, all the fatigue, the advertisements, the traffic, the chatter, the meaningless that it's everywhere. And funny enough, I hear there's literally white noise playing right now in my background because my wife and daughter are taking a nap. So it's just kind of funny. And so this is a very long deep dive into many different ideas, but one of the best is that one of the coolest things that I remember that it showed me is that our Western religion is no longer Christ or anything like that. It's consumerism. It's consumption. That is our new God. And much more so than Houellebecq, DeLillo creates beautiful sentences. Maybe it's a translation thing, but he creates beautiful, dreamy sequences of people and their relationship to brands, to supermarkets, to so many different things. And it's absolutely spectacular. And it's scary because you feel the same way about some things. And it's okay to feel irrational. It's okay to be into brands and enjoy their values and pay extra for them. Like, that's not the end of the world. But some people have just been totally consumed into them or polarized by them toward the negative in rejection of them and thinking that they're not good enough. And I've already talked about a lot of that, but this is all compounded by a chemical disaster in the novel, and I won't really spoil anything. That is this big metaphor that one could talk about, COVID and the lab leak and all that these new technological advancements and everything that we are working toward are supposed to free us. But in actuality, we are having more existential panic than ever. We are priming ourselves for more environmental catastrophes than ever. I'm not even talking about global warming. I'm talking about nuclear reaction meltdowns, oil pipeline leaks, viruses getting out, whatever. Entire infrastructures being shut down by hacking, like crazy stuff. And so this novel does a really good job of showing how we've lost trust in institutions. Institutions in Western culture and civilization were the things that we stood around. Marriage, religion, the courts, whatever. And they've all had their problems throughout time. But nonetheless, they did uplift us. They did orient us. And over the last 50 or 60 years, we could say even the last 150 years because of the world wars, we've ripped away so many of those. And they didn't get replaced by autonomy. They didn't get replaced, which would be fine. The only thing, I should say, those institutions are there and have been there for thousands of years because they are important. And getting rid of them is great at some level, but only if they are replaced by personal autonomy, by people able to transcend their instincts. But we didn't do either. We got rid of the institutions and actually made people, as we were talking about with the hippie stuff, more hedonistic and more easily manipulative. More easy. Okay, now I'm just stumbling over my words. People are more easy to manipulate now. That's not a good combination, and that's why we're having so many crises. And it's sad because there's a ping pong effect back. I know so many people who have gone into these existential crises and just are returning to religion in a weakened state. Not coming at it from a strong place. They're coming at it because they're scared. They need stability. The same with the government. And so this novel also shows that our modern obsession with death. If you look at people into horror films and immortality and plastic surgery, all this stuff, we have this obsession with trying to avoid death, Ernest Becker, the denial of death style. And this novel explores all of that really well too. And it brings it all together into something really good. And if you read this, your perception of where we are at in Western civilization is not going to get better. This is 10 novels that prove that it's dying. Many of these aren't that hopeful. But hopefully I'm giving some redirects here so that, I don't like to deconstruct and destroy everything and make it all negative. I like there to be a glimmer of hope. And so boom, there you go. And so moving on to our next novel. You guys already know it has to be Infinite Jest. I am wearing the shirt, and I've ranted about Infinite Jest a lot on this channel, so I will keep it to the facts and why it shows the decay of Western civilization. But this novel is one of the better explorations of our obsession, our addiction to technology and to drugs, and how that plays out with personal stories in the modern world. How people who are addicted to drugs, even drugs like marijuana or pornography, television, food, what that looks like, what that feels like in the interior. And Wallace does some really good sections with some crazy interiority that is 100% accurate. And I know it because at one point I smoked weed every single day for 6 years straight. I probably had 5 years off in 6 years. And was just smoking, at least an eighth every single day, just addicted. And anyway, there's really good sections in this, but he shows how drugs getting better and drugs being made more available, and then technology being made more available is going to be one of the major downfalls of Western society. And in the novel, Western civilization is in decline. It kind of has a speculative fiction part to it where the United States and Mexico have all merged into one big nation, but it's not a good government, and it's actually started to brand itself. It's started to give its the months on the calendar and the years associations with brands, like the year of the trial-sized Dove bar. And so this is just a heady and deep exploration of one of our biggest problems, which Wallace talks about extensively and shows the metaphor of paralysis I've been talking about better than anyone else. So many characters in this novel just can't move, literally. Sometimes they freeze and they can't move because of their addictions, because of their obsession with technology. And that's what's happening right now. We can't make any change because people are literally locked down. People are physically locked with their technological devices and their addictions to pornography, food, and drugs. And for a lot of people, it's a combination of alcohol or weed or both, pornography, and then food. And if you're doing all three of those things, you are taking 70% of your vital energy away. Literally, it's crazy, you guys. Honestly, I'm not here on some moral bandwagon telling you not to masturbate or something like that. But if you go read Gary Wilson's book, Your Brain on Porn, and look what it does to your brain. Look what it does to your energy. And the best way to see what it does to your energy is not do it for 30 days. If you can even make it that far, and see how much more energy you have. And the same with food. Eat healthy. Do the Whole30 challenge for 30 days and see how much more energy you have. Don't smoke weed or drink alcohol for 30 days. Do all three for 30 days and you will literally feel like a new human being. The changes you will have you will be mind blown, you guys. What happens if you don't, you feel normal again. I remember when I first did it, I was like, holy shit, I've been in a fog my entire life. The first 20 years of my life were just in a fog. And when I finally quit weed, I was like, oh my God, my memory works. How crazy is this? But if we want to stop decaying, we got to activate. We have to have people, we don't need to go protest, but we need people taking actions, being conscious individuals, because not everyone needs to be the literary celebrity. Earlier I was talking about, we need these people to lift us up, but there need to be people in your community, in every single sector of life, who are the idol, who are the transcendent person, who are uplifting everyone. And there's none of that. The school I work at right now, everyone, as an English teacher, maybe I'm that, not to toot my own horn, but all my coworkers, Jesus Christ, I couldn't see none of them uplift each other. They all just down each other. There is no transcendent figure there, which is horrific because it's not just for each other, but for the kids. There's no one there that I would think that anyone idolizing would be a good idea, or going to for advice. You're going to go to the alcoholic divorcee that's got an anger problem, who seems cool as a teacher, but is that who we need to be going to? Anyway, and so in all sectors, we need these people. And so not everyone needs to be the best or go change the world or go online or write a book or do whatever. But you need to be the best for your family. You need to lead your family. You need to lead your group of friends. You need to lead your community. We need people everywhere, because if we don't, everyone starts circling the drain. You guys don't know, and hopefully you do know, how great things are when you can activate people. Like, I've had friends activate me before and lift me up, and I've done it for other people. And it's crazy to see that I have friends who I've helped activate whose lives have dramatically changed because I greenhorned in front of them and was just a little bit higher in terms of like doing transcendent things and trying to do better, trying to do something for a purpose. Their lives have changed. And there are so many people who have helped me along the way. Where would I be if they just said, fuck it, I'm just going to grill and chill and whack one off? Where would we be? This is why this novel is important, everyone. It shows you how people get paralyzed, what technology in modern society is doing to people. And until we solve that problem, we're not going anywhere. Even if we can find 5 literary celebrities, we need a managerial class of people in every home, every workplace, activating other people who maybe don't have someone in their house or don't know who to look at online to activate them, to give them that nudge. And not everyone needs to be perfect. That's what's crazy. For Western civilization to be great, for this world to become so much better, we don't need to create a utopia. We don't need to control people. Everyone just needs to become like 10% better. Could you imagine if everyone became 10% more thoughtful, nonviolent, intelligent, loving? What would that look like, you guys, honestly? It would look dramatic. Everything would change. If we got that number to the 30%, we would think it was a utopia. We'd be like, holy shit. And so I will cut it there for my infinite jest rant. And so let's move forward. So next we have Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. And what's crazy about Chuck Palahniuk, I've said this before, is that he could have become our celebrity with these. This isn't even my favorite novel by him. He has a lot better works, but this one did hit a cultural pulse with, the movie, and still does, and still is it's a good book. But I just feel sad that Palahniuk really didn't use his moment and what he was doing for something more. But this novel is a perfect kind of showing of the masculinity crisis that's happening in America. There's just no two ways around it. As I was saying earlier, we don't need to return to this old ideal of masculinity, but to where it was supposed to go. And what we are doing right now is not that. And one of the biggest parts of that is martial arts, is getting out of these corporate jobs, is activating ourselves, is doing irrational things. Because those are the people who are activated. I was a ski instructor for years, and many of those guys who I knew were very free, and they didn't have the transcendent side of things where they didn't have a feel a need to actually help people or uplift people, but they were free. They were not constrained by anything. And if we could get that, and same in martial arts, I knew so many dudes in martial arts that were so free and like their energy was just so boundless. It was wild. And if we could combine that energy, the harmony of pen and sword, with a form of intelligent or intellectual freedom, it's crazy. And that is the union of modern masculinity. That needs to happen if we want to stop the rot. Because I'm not going to sit here and say that everyone needs to be a manly man and that people can't be gay or anything like that. But there are masculine traits and feminine traits. And there can be feminine people there can be women that are honorable and strong and do all this stuff. But in general, it is much easier for men, just based on their biology and the culture we've created in Western civilization, to do and tap into these masculine traits. And anyone who doesn't think that way is an idiot. And like I said, there are men who have a very loving and caring disposition just by heart. And they don't need to become the fucking warrior. And maybe they can a little bit, and that can help them become more balanced. But in general, men and women should be trying to get a baseline of all the major masculine and feminine traits and then capitalizing on their strengths. Because if you just have a man who is totally masculine with no feminine attributes, then you just get tyrants, you get assholes. And we don't need any more of that. But we also don't need people who are just in the middle ground, who are just, a lot of people are like that. A lot of dudes will fight and get angry when they need to and can be loving, but they haven't polarized into their strengths, into their power yet, especially for men. And that's where we're at right now. I know so many men who, if something immoral started happening in America, wouldn't do anything. Honestly, they would just let it happen. And it's crazy to see that if that, the same couldn't be said about men in even the 1950s, the 1960s. And that was kind of one of the things that happened in the hippie movement, is we started to move away from viewing men who embodied masculinity at a high level as these positive people. Because a man that is fully masculine and has maxed out those traits and is really living it out in the world, and he has that baseline so he doesn't become a tyrant and can love when he needs to love and be fair and all of those things, he's not a problem. And the same could be said about a woman. If there is a woman out there who can be strong and take action and do shit that needs to be done, when it needs to be done and all these things, but she maxes out her ability to care and to love and all these different things. Honestly, when you look back at history and all the most influential people, it's men and women who did that. It's not men and women who were the perfect balance. I don't look at all these random female billionaires that are just totally yacked up on power and like, damn, they got it. I don't look at super feminine men and be like, those are the biggest movers and changers of emotionality and love in history. And so many people may think that this is a regressive view, but I think that biologically we should be, at least most people, and there's obviously outliers and exceptions, most people should be tuning into and working on their strengths. And so hopefully this is a more holistic take on Fight Club, that this novel is about men taking radical action to find their masculinity again. And we have been sterilized in the modern workforce. If you go look at most men at work, especially in middle class or upper class jobs, they are playing out these weird Napoleonic dopaminic, okay, whatever, urges and games like they're playing World of Warcraft, with no moral or ethical center, and they are unhealthy. They are overweight. Robert Bly calls this the grandiose path. He talks about in his very famous book, Iron John, which everyone should go and read, which is the Bible of the men's movement. If there is one book that is out there to explain masculinity and what it truly looks like, it is Iron John by Robert Bly, one of the most influential poets in American history, one of the best poets in American history, and one of the best leaders of the men's movement. But he talks about how most men in this modern world are being programmed to go on this grandiose, ambitious path, or on this kind of depressed inward path, this path of paralysis. And then if they are lucky, when they are 50, they wake up again and realize that they've been duped, that they've been taken on this random journey. And so we need to move away from that. And so I hope that anyone who is still listening, who's made it this far, the 90% of viewers who are men, continue either to do what you are doing or figure out how to step it up. And so there it is. There is the hot take on masculinity that nobody really wants to hear, because once again, as you're starting to see, it's the same advice. You're going to have to go through the dark night of the soul. You're actually going to have to put in work and do something that's bigger than just yourself or just working for your family. I'm just doing this to pay the bills. It's going to have to be bigger than that if we are going to save Western civilization. And so moving on to our next work, which may come as a surprise, to some of you guys. And I'm sorry if there are mistakes as this presentation moves forward, but all of this is unscripted, as you can maybe tell. And this video is reaching now 2 hours long, and I am slowly fatiguing. And so thank you to everyone out there who is bearing with me and holding it down like a soul jaw. And FYI, I'm going to launch my t-shirts very soon, shipping all across the world. So if you are interested, look out for that. If you are seeing this anytime past August 3rd or 4th, then the t-shirts are out, and you should find the link in the bio if you want to rep some literature streetwear on the streets. So next we have A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which is one of the better selling books of the last 20 years. I think this series has sold tens of millions of copies so far. And I want to make something clear right now. Something that is not helpful is Logic Bros, the red pillars, saying about women who like to read romantasy, oh, that's so dumb. You guys are so dumb. Because I know actually many women, like my wife and some of our friends, who love romantasy, who eat it up, get super into it. But they also read literary fiction. They also love David Lynch movies. And men can be very judgmental, because if you like football, if you like sports, it's just as dumb as romantasy. It's just a random way to pass the time. And so in our life, there needs to be a blend of entertainment and transformation. No doubt about it. I'm not some prude hardliner. I watch dumb stuff and read dumb stuff, get sucked into sports sometimes, and it's not the end of the world. But something else has started to happen over the past couple decades that has really thrown us off, because what about the ladies? Ladies' night, everybody, let's go. I just talked about men and men not reaching their highest ideal. But what about the ladies? And as a man right now, I'm going to do a violation, red flag everyone. I'm going to say and make a generalization for all women. The highest potential of women isn't being some subservient housewife and a pleasure vehicle for some detached man. And it's also not being some unethical boss bitch in the workforce. Just how, that's not it for men on the other side of the aisle. Crazy. And I don't even know where to start, everyone, when it comes to the discussion of the social engineering, that women have undergone. It's crazy. But one of the sadder things that I've witnessed is women's dopamine systems being preyed upon, because the romantasy, the romance, even the mystery genres mostly have female readership. And like I said, reading those books for fun, no big deal. But when you have nothing transformative in your life and you are just this flat consumer, you've achieved liberation and can work and do all these things, and that's great. But with that, much like men, you've just chosen to read about Biker Johnny. That's not liberation. And it's a continuation, actually, of many of the systems and frameworks that held women down for so long. And so a theme that you guys have been hearing me talk about is people activating, people actually getting going. And there's a great book out there. I think it's called Dopamine Nation, and it's by this female psychiatrist or something. And in the introduction, she admits that she got addicted to romantasy novels, that she was spending all her time, her money, and was functionally an addict, even though she was a coach of, or, helped people with addiction of these kind of novels. They became her life because she was in an unhappy marriage and all these different things. It was wild to read. And I personally know many women who consume hundreds of these books a year. And if not this, just endless doom scrolling, endless watching of reality TV or whatever. And it's causing them to live in fantasy and just this fake reality, and losing and causing them to lose one of their most precious gifts. And in terms of femininity, one of the highest ideals on that side of the aisle is caring, is loving. And if you've ever met a woman who is a great mother, a great friend, it's insane. Like my wife, she knows my needs even when I don't know them myself. She can pre-predict and know all these things, and it's insane. And she does it not only for me, but for her friends, her family, when at her work, her female colleagues, she'll know what to do. And it's wild. But that doesn't just come out of nowhere, because I've known plenty of women who don't have that. That comes from presence. That comes from actually being intuitive and feeling. And if your dopamine systems are fucking off the chart, if you have a conception of reality that is fake, if you are being trained to think that things are supposed to be a certain way, that isn't real, then you are focusing on the representation. And so women, especially in their liberated state, they have the ability through their love, through their caring, to be a force of unification and activation that we've never seen before, that has never been properly utilized in the past. And it's sad to see that we are obliterating the masculine and especially the feminine in our society now, because it never even got off the ground. And this isn't just in interpersonal relationships. I think that this is the case in art too. If you talk to bros, they'll be like, women aren't as good as authors or comedians as men. Name one female comedian that's good. Yeah, she has some good jokes. But if you just look at it in totality, women haven't been in the game for as long. We have people like Mary Shelley and Jane Austen, but in general, men can orient to so many different references for their personal growth, and women are still in the foundational building processes, because it's real. There is a hard divide in gender, and it's easier for many people to resonate with their own gender than the other gender. And when one gender hasn't had as much time and as many classics and as much effort put into genres or whatever, it's not as easy for other people in that gender to be motivated in it. The same could be said about certain aspects of masculinity that are now being kind of carved out in the more feminine zone. And so when it comes to art, because, what I was just kind of saying is actually kind of one of these classic tropes that could be critiqued by feminism and women. And I get it that women are this healing force. What do you mean? Sexually, when men need women to activate so that they can go out in the world and go do great things. And I'm not exactly saying that. I'm saying that same force, that same presence could be used for art, could be used for content creation in whatever realm outside of reality to do so much good. But when I look at what women are consuming, mostly, it's really easy to see what the ones that do decide to do art will be outputting. The input equals the output. And so readership has shifted dramatically over the past however many years to women, even in the realm of literary fiction. And from what I can tell, a lot of the works are moving and decent, but they aren't transformative. Some are. And I think that is a huge problem, that we have 50% of the population in the West who can do something, And much like men are just paralyzed because they've been obfuscated and don't know the potential of their power and what could be. And so it's not just a masculinity crisis, it's a femininity crisis. You can just look at any of the beauty standards and what's going on with OnlyFans and any of that to get an idea of, is that the highest potential? And so this book right here for romanticy is okay, draws you in. But what if 20 million, 30 million women read something transformative? And they don't need to read William T. Vollman, Europe Central. But what if they read something by one of these literary celebrities who was a woman and it activated them? What would the world look like? Like I said, what are those shifts? What's the opposite of dying and decay? And so the books we consume in mass, including men, are where our collective consciousness is at currently. And so this is a good study of where we've been going wrong. And so last but not least, we have Fahrenheit 451, which is kind of a typical boring pick, but it's so important because we have gone beyond Fahrenheit 451. In Fahrenheit 451, all books have been banned and people don't care. But in our society, it's even more dystopic. I just mentioned shadow libraries that have tens of millions of books available for free, every single one click away. Anyone with any sense could get on there and find them. Anyone can go to the library and get knowledge on your phone, on podcasts, whatever. And we have consciously choosing, not to consume information. We've been so socially engineered with this anti-intellectualism now to turn our noses up and call people who are into knowledge pretentious and all these things. And it's an absolute nightmare. We have entered what's called a post-literate world where people can all kind of read and write, but don't choose to and don't have the ability because they haven't tried since high school to be able to read something hard if they even wanted to. And what's crazy is that, in my opinion, the social engineers are just doing this all outright. They don't even care. The public school system is a joke, you guys, but nobody cares. Nobody tries to fix it. There is not one rational argument out there other than we want to keep the people off the streets and just contain them and try to get them some socialization. There's not one rational argument that could tell me that the over $100,000 that we are pumping into every single student and the 10,000 hours that they are spending in school, that we're even cracking 1 or 2% of the potential there. The government can go attack whatever country it wants. It can shut down our entire country and we literally will do nothing. We don't care. We're at the point where we've lost our strength and our morality and have fully embodied our passivity. Honestly, think about it. What would have to happen for us to actually do something? What did the George Floyd protests accomplish? Nothing. What did getting Trump in office do? Nothing. What did getting Biden in office do? Nothing. It's the same story over and over and over again. All our energy being put into these hopeful ideas and things getting worse and worse. Less happy, less healthy, less intelligent every single year. I don't care about the GDP. I would be fine becoming, far beyond China, far behind Russia, if we could get our population on board toward one of those 10% awakenings. I don't care about that. None of you guys really care about that. I don't care about Israel. I don't care about Palestine. I don't care about Africa. I care about in the Western world right now with our insane amount of resources, we haven't even figured out how to solve our simplest problems yet. The most simple of them all. And instead, we're focused on fixing everyone else's problems that are 10 times more, 1 million times more complicated? Really? And so Ray Bradbury was wrong. It doesn't look like this. A dystopic reality looks like what is happening right now. Like I said, comment down below. What would it take for people to actually do something? We've had terrorist attacks, government shutdowns, protests, and still nothing. And so the only thing we can do, the only solution is everyone out there taking individual action, consciously activating, and then becoming a source or anchor of transcendence for everyone that surrounds you. And then when you accomplish that, figuring out how to help people at scale, more than one person at a time, which is the gift of the internet. The internet has been used to brainwash and pacify people, but it could have been used the same way if the content on there was different, if the content creators were releasing different things, if the mediums were being used in a different way. And so I implore you guys that even if you don't want to do that work, support people who are doing that work. You can support my channel and support and find anyone else who is doing this, anyone else who is trying to stop the rot of our society. And don't listen to anyone saying, oh, these are just talking points, Western civilization is fine. No, I believe in you guys. I am optimistic about all this. I've been talking now for hours researching, thinking. My brain is fried. And so thank you guys all for being here. I hope you guys liked the video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you guys very soon in a much shorter video than this one.